Now that you've cut out all of your pieces from your fabric and applied your interfacing, you're ready to start constructing your bag. The first thing we're going to do is create the bag outside pocket piece. And these are the pieces that you're going to need. You're going to need your pattern piece because you need to be able to transfer markings. And then you're going to need the bag pocket outside piece and the bag pocket lining piece. Again, this piece has shape flex interfacing on it, and this piece has fusible fleece interfacing on it. And then you're also going to need your bag accent piece cut out and interfaced with the fusible fleece. For now, we're going to go ahead and set the accent piece aside, and we're going to work on the pocket. So I've gone through and transferred the markings from my pattern piece onto my fabric, and I've just used my disappearing ink fabric pen for that. Now, I always like to apply my markings to the lining and to the outside fabric, because sometimes when you're sewing pleats, you want to look at it from the other side just to double check your measurement. So I always find it helpful to mark it on the lining as well. So now we're just going to take the two pieces and we are going to pin them right sides facing, and we're just going to pin the curves. So we're going to come through and put a few pins on each side. Just going to make sure everything is lined up nicely. Okay, and then we're going to go ahead and go over to my sewing machine. I have my stitch length set at 3, and I just have a standard foot on my sewing machine. And I'm going to sew with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. I'm going to sew this curve. And then I'm going to make sure that I lock my stitch. And I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing to the other side. So now we're going to go ahead, and we want this curve to lay nice and flat when we've got it turned right side out. So what we're going to do is we're going to come in with our nice sharp little scissors, and I'm just going to cut some notches in the curve. And I'm going to do this on both sides. One thing you want to watch out for when you do this is make sure that you don't clip down to the stitching line, because I have done that before, and then you're going to end up with a hole. Just going to go right up to the edge of the stitching line. Okay, I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. Get all these little extra pieces out of the way. Okay, now you're just going to turn this right side out. So I'm just going to take the bag, and then I like to put my hand on the inside and kind of use my hand to get that seam so that it comes all the way out and get that curve laying nice and flat. Because what you don't want is you don't want it to be folded over like this. You want to make sure that it's pulled all the way out. And then I'll do the same thing to the other side. Kind of use my hand to kind of force that seam open right there. Okay, and then when I've kind of got that finger pressed how I like, then I'm going to come over here and I'm going to go to my iron and go ahead and press this in place. I'm going to do the same thing to the other side, making sure that I've got that nice flat. And you can kind of, sometimes what I'll do is I'll steam it a little bit. I'll just hit it with some steam, and then instead of ironing it, I'll kind of use my fingers to kind of get it to go where I want it to go. Because you want, this is going to show on the front of the bag, so you want to take a little bit of time and make sure that that seam looks nice. Then we're going to come over here to the machine again, and we are going to go ahead and just top stitch down the edge of this. So I'm probably 1/8 of an inch in from the edge. Okay, and do the same thing to the other side. Okay, now we're going to go ahead and make the pleats in the front of the bag. So I use a pen that disappears with heat. So I always keep my pattern piece close by because a lot of times when I'm ironing, I'll lose my markings. So I'm just gonna go ahead and line this up again, just right, and I'm just gonna reinforce those markings because I did lose some of them when I ironed that. Okay, so I've got those markings in place. I like to kind of draw them about 1 inch or so long. Okay, so now we're gonna go ahead and make the pleats for the front of the bag. And the ones in the bottom are fine. So what I like to do is do the top one first. I'm just gonna start, and I'm gonna put a pin on the marks because I know it's probably hard with the camera to see where the marks are. So what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna take this pin and I'm gonna fold it over, making sure that I grab all the pieces of my fabric and line it up so that it's right on top of the other pin. Just like that. Kind of get that to lay nicely. And then we'll go ahead and do the other, same thing on the other side at the top. And it's really important when you do this that you catch all the layers of the fabric. You want to make sure you get that lining in there too. I'm just going to pull this down, fold this over. Okay, pin that in place. So there's your top pleat. Now the bottom pleat is a little different, and I'll go ahead and put some pins in it so that you can see easier what I'm doing. So I'll put 1 pin in each of my 3 marks at the bottom of the bag. Okay, so now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take and I'm gonna bring both of the outside marks to the center. So I'll fold this over like that. And then I will pin it in place. And then if you notice, this mark kind of lines up with this mark, so you can then press that so it's a little easier to work with. And then bring this one over, kind of get that fabric. You just want to kind of manipulate that piece so that it lays the way you want it to. Okay, so we've got that piece, that side like we want, and then we're going to do the same thing on the other side. Start with the pins, with where the marks are. I need a little bigger pin for this one. You need the big, heavy pins for this. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and pull that one over. Then go ahead and pull this one over. Now I'm going to adjust this one because I feel like that's not exactly flat on the bottom. So I'm just going to kind of move that one again because you want all those layers of fabric to sit right on top of each other. Okay, so we've got that pinned. Now we're going to go ahead and take it to the machine and we're going to baste the pleats in place. So to do that, I need to go to my machine and I need to go ahead and change my stitch length as high as it will go. So it's usually a 5 or a 6, depends on your sewing machine. And then I'm going to go ahead and baste this in place. And I'm just going to go ahead and stick with my 1/2 inch seam allowance because this is going to get pulled out anyway. Just going to go right over the top of the bag. Okay, and then I'm going to do the same thing to the bottom of the bag. Make sure all this lays nice and flat. And I'm just going to start maybe a 1/2 inch from the side of the pleat. And start sewing that pleat in place. Going to keep those pieces all laying right on top of each other as you sew. And if you mess up, just go back and unpick it. It's only basting stitch, so it'll be really easy to unpick. Okay, okay, so we've got the pleats done. Now what I like to do is just come over to the iron and press them in place. It makes it a lot easier to work with the bag as if it gets a little bit flatter. That side, and then go ahead and do this side. Just get that where you think it looks nice. So now you've got the pleats in place. So the last step is we're going to go ahead and attach it to the accent piece of fabric. So these pieces should be really close to the same size. If they're not, make them the same size, because if one's a little bigger or smaller, it's just going to kind of add to the poof of the bag, so you're not going to notice it. But you do want to go ahead and get your raw edges of the pieces even. So for this one, there's two ways you can do this. You can use binding clips, or you can use pins. I think sometimes that the binding clips are a little bit easier to use when you're dealing with thicker fabrics like this. So I'm going to go ahead and use binding clips on the top, and then on the sides I'm going to use pins, just because I want a little bit more precise as I go around these corners. I'm just going to pin all this so it's lined up. Get it lined up the best you can. You've got about a ½ inch to play with because of your seam allowance, but you still want to go ahead and try and get those right on top of each other. Okay, so I've got that pinned. So now I'm going to baste again, and I'm going to baste across the top, and then I'm going to baste all the way across the bottom pocket of the bag. Okay. Okay, we're going to do the same thing to the top of the bag. Okay, now that you've got that basted in place, you want to do the exact same thing to your other bag pocket pieces, and then we're going to go ahead and assemble the outside of the bag.